movie to show you, made by many of our children and a couple of our adults. It tells a great story that comes from the very beginning of the book of Exodus.
So last week, we told you this wild story about Joseph who got sold into slavery by his 10 older brothers.
Yeah, they were jealous because Joseph was clearly their father's favorite.
Joseph ended up in Egypt, far from home, in a prison cell.
But ended up as Pharaoh's prime minister.
Joseph helped Pharaoh plan for a time of famine.
They stored up grain for years in advance. Because of Joseph,
many thousands of people were saved from starvation.
Joseph's 11 brothers came to live in Egypt.
Joseph forgave his brothers the terrible thing they'd done to him.
He knew that God had used the bad thing his brothers had done
to bring about something wonderful,
saving many people from starving.
All of the brothers and their wives had many children.
And these children grew up and had children.
And so on and so on and so on.
Now after 300 years,
all the descendants of Joseph and his brothers
numbered thousands of people.
they came to be called the Hebrew people.
and their descendants, the Jewish people.
Jesus was Jewish.
Over time, the good things Joseph had done to save many lives were forgotten.
As the Hebrew people grew in number, the Egyptian Pharaoh came to see them as a threat.
What if an enemy attacks us? Will the Hebrew people rise up and help them?
So the Pharaoh forced the Hebrews to be his slave workers.
And working them to the bone.
Even so, the Hebrew people continued to grow in number. Frightened that they might revolt, Pharaoh came up with an evil plan. I called the 2 midwives who deliver all the babies in Egypt.
Shipra, that's me.
Pua, that's me.
Listen, ladies, this is what I want you to do. When you're called to the house of the Hebrews to deliver a baby, if it's a baby boy, I want you to kill him.
Pharaoh's afraid that the boys will grow up to be soldiers.
Soldiers who would fight in a revolt against him.
When I gave them the order, I could tell they were going to mind me. They shook their heads. But when Pua and Shipra were out of sight of Pharaoh, they had a big laugh.
The midwives said to one another,
Newborn babies are gifts from God. All babies are precious to God.
We obey God, not Pharaoh.
Word got back to Pharaoh
that the Hebrew baby boys were still being born.
And I was not happy.
He confronted Shipra
and Pua.
What's this I hear about the Hebrew baby boys being allowed to live?
These Hebrew mothers are so tough.
Some tough women, these Hebrew mothers.
Yep, nothing we can do about it.
God smiled on Pua and Shipra for choosing to do what was good
And not what was evil.
The Hebrew people continued to grow in number. And to tell you the truth, it scared me, so I came up with a diabolical plan.
He put forth an order throughout the land.
Every boy who is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile. Which is this great river that flows through Egypt?
It was a horrible thing Pharaoh commanded. An evil thing.
Pharaoh sent out his soldiers to search out the Hebrew baby boys.
And sadly,
For a couple of years, most of them got killed.
One day, a Hebrew baby boy was born for whom God had a special plan.
a plan that would one day lead to the Hebrew people being freed from their slavery to Pharaoh.
For 3 months, the baby's mother, that's me. And his sister, that's me.
Hid the child from the soldiers.
But I knew if I kept the baby in my home.
Eventually, the soldiers would find him.
Babies tend to cry a lot after all.
One day, I came up with a plan. I think God inspired my mother's plan. I made a basket of papyrus that would float on the water of the Nile.
Then she put her baby in the basket.
And I placed the basket with my precious son among the reeds of the bank of the river.
It must have been a really scary thing for the baby's mom to do.
Somehow, though, I trusted God to care for my baby. I hid nearby to watch.
To see what would happen. It just so happened that where she placed the basket
was the very place where Pharaoh's own daughter, that's me,
And her attendants would come every day to bathe. No bathtubs in those days.
They found the basket.
And the baby who was crying inside it.
I took pity on the child.
How could she not?
It was at that point that I stepped out from my hiding place. Excuse me, ma'am, but would you like me to go find a nice Hebrew woman?
Yes, please.
The baby's big sister went and got their mother.
Bringing her back, Pharaoh's daughter hired Moses' mother to nurse the baby.
Until he could eat solid food.
When the baby boy no longer needed to be nursed,
I handed the baby to Pharaoh's daughter.
Which must have made her very sad.
It did.
But she knew the baby would be safe.
Because I loved the child and raised him as my own son.
In the palace, no less, with a fine education.
I named the boy Moses.
which is the Egyptian word that means something like,
I drew him out of the water.
With the exception of one really bad overacting job, that was a wonderful performance, wasn't it? Tells a pretty powerful story. It tells us about some brave women. To tell you the truth, in the Bible, the women tend to get short shrift. But this story lets us know that there were some faithful, courageous women who stood up to injustice and cruelty and did the right thing, the act of mercy and compassion, such as the Egyptian midwives. We'll go back to the Egyptian midwives. Thank you, Terry. They defied the order of the Pharaoh and refused to kill the babies. You know what midwives are? Midwives are women who come, usually women, and assist when a mother gives birth. And they refuse to kill the baby boys who are Hebrews. What courage. And also, Moses' mother and big sister, who were determined not to let their little baby die, and had this courageous act. And Pharaoh's daughter, very daughter of Pharaoh, defied her father, did what was right, raised that child up with love. You can do brave things too. You can be faithful and courageous and make a difference in this world. And here's another thing the story tells us, which runs through the whole Bible. God is on the side of the underdog, on people like the Hebrews who got oppressed by Pharaoh. God is always at work in the world, trying to help people who are pushed down to come up and rise and be their full selves. That's how great and wide is the love of God, which is why at the end of our children's time, what is it we always say? There's always room in the circle.